There's a particular kind of tiredness that comes from seeing too clearly. It doesn't feel like wisdom. It feels like standing at a party where everyone is laughing, and you can hear, underneath the laughter, the silence the laughter is meant to cover. You used to laugh too. You remember it. But now the sound won't come out the same way, and you're not sure whether to grieve that or be proud of it. You notice it in small moments. A friend tells you about their weekend, and somewhere behind your kind face, a quiet voice is cataloging the distractions, the brunches, the show they're binging, the renovation. You don't say anything. You don't want to be that person. But you can't unhear what you've heard. You can't unsee the architecture of avoidance, especially because some nights you'd give almost anything to climb back inside it. Blaise Pascal may have been living exactly what you just recognized. He was a mathematician of staggering precision, the kind of mind that could take an idea apart down to the joints. And somewhere in his 30s, that same precision turned inward, and he understood something he could not put back. He saw that most of human activity, the wars, the courtships, the politics, the entertainments, existed to keep people from sitting alone in a room with their own thoughts. He called it divertissement, diversion, and once he had named it, he could not stop seeing it. Not in others, not in himself. What people remember about Pascal is the famous wager, the cold-eyed argument that one might as well believe in God, because the math of belief is favorable. It's usually taught as clever logic. But underneath the logic is something far more human. It's the sound of a person who has looked directly at the void trying to talk himself into permission to keep living. The wager isn't a proof. It's a survival strategy dressed up in equations. This is the part of the pattern that's hardest to see from the inside. When you first glimpse the arbitrariness of things, the made-up nature of the rules, the borrowed scripts, the careful theaters of meaning that entice, there's a small rush, a feeling of being awake while others sleep, and that feeling quietly becomes its own identity. You are now the one who sees, and the one who sees cannot, without a kind of self-betrayal, go back to being the one who simply lives. So a loop begins. The clarity isolates you. The isolation deepens the clarity. The deepened clarity makes the ordinary lives around you look thinner, which makes returning to them feel like surrender, which leaves you with only the clarity for company. And the clarity, it turns out, doesn't keep you warm. Notice what your mind does next. It tries to solve the problem with the same tool that created it. More thinking, more reading, more frameworks. You hunt for the philosophy, the practice, the teacher, the synthesis that will finally let you live. Each one works for a few days, then you start seeing through it too. And here's the quiet trap. The part of you that sees through things has begun to need things to see through. Without something to dismantle, who would you be? There is also a hidden reward you may not have admitted to yourself. The suffering of knowing feels like proof. Proof that you're not shallow. Proof that you took the world seriously. If you stopped suffering, you might worry you had simply gone back to sleep. So a strange bargain forms inside you. The anxiety is uncomfortable, but it's also the receipt that says you were honest. Putting it down feels like losing your only evidence of having been real. This pattern shows up in people who would never call themselves philosophical. The therapist who has named every attachment style so precisely that ordinary closeness now feels like a diagram. The person who learned how social media is engineered and now cannot scroll without watching their own dopamine being harvested. The neuroscientist who knows their grief is neurochemistry and feels guilty for grieving anyway. The parent who has read too much about child development, and can no longer trust the ordinary hand on the small back. The recovering person who can suddenly see the dysfunction in every family at the table, including the ones who seem happy. None of them asked for the seeing, none of them can unsee it, and all of them are tired in a way the unaware around them don't quite understand. What Pascal did in the end was not solve this. He made a move. He chose, knowing he was choosing, to live as if certain things mattered, while remaining fully aware that he could not prove they did. That's the part the textbooks skip. The wager wasn't a victory over doubt. It was a way of placing his life somewhere, anywhere, so that he could stop bleeding out into the open question. He didn't recover innocence. He built a structure on top of his knowing and walked inside. You may have been waiting for a different solution, a way to genuinely unsee, a return to the warm, unreflective living you can almost remember. That probably isn't coming. The mind, once it has learned a certain motion, keeps making it. But you may not need to unsee. You may only need to stop using your seeing as your entire identity, to let it be a thing you can do instead of the only thing you are. Because here is what the pattern obscures. The people you watch laughing at the party are not actually as unconscious as your loneliness needs them to be. Most of them know somewhere what you know. They have simply decided to lay down a small weight you are still carrying. The weight of needing to be the one who never looks away. They are not betraying the truth. They are living next to it. And you are allowed to do that too. This is the pattern. The seeing that began as freedom became a room you couldn't leave. The clarity that was supposed to liberate you became the proof you needed of your own depth. The diversions you could no longer take were never the enemy. They were the way human beings have always carried something they cannot fully hold. You have lived this. You can see its shape now, and seeing its shape is different from being inside it.